If I say I'm going to talk to you about the importance of communication in your home, you probably assume that I'm going to talk about talking. And of course, if we're going to communicate well, we need to learn how to say the right things and to say them in the right way. But there's more to communication than just talking, actually. And one of the things that makes us more effective communicators, and certainly one of the ways that the gospel should impact the way that we communicate, is that it makes us better listeners. If you're going to communicate in a way that honors Christ and that is good for people, you're going to have to learn to speak the truth. You're going to have to learn to deal with anger and be self controlled. You're going to have to learn to show compassion and to speak in ways that build up and not tear down. And you are going to have to learn to listen. Good communication, mark it down, never forget it. Good communication involves more than just talking. What happens when you're talking and someone is not listening to you? Hopefully you notice. If you don't notice, there's a problem. But most of us notice uh, when someone's not listening to us, and we tend to not want to talk to them, or we get angry or frustrated. What happens when someone obviously is listening to you, however? It draws you to them. It makes you want to open up more. It makes you feel understood. And it gets you ready to actually hear what they have to say to you. It's easy to take the importance of listening for granted, but let's think about why listening is so important. Let me give you just a couple of reasons quickly. If you don't listen, you're not showing love to the other person. Listening is a way of loving. It's a way of putting someone else's interests above your own. If you don't listen, you're acting like you're more important than the other person. That's one of the reasons why we often struggle to listen, honestly. We're proud and we think, I don't have time to listen to what this person's saying to me right now, or what they're saying to me. I already know it, or I have more interesting things to talk about. If you don't listen, it's going to be really difficult to truly hear what the other person is saying. I know that we think we're smart and that we can know what someone means before they even really explain themselves, but we can't. We're not that smart. We're not God. We can't see into people's hearts, and we don't know everything about what people are going through. And so if we don't listen to them, it's going to be difficult for us to even understand their problems. If you don't listen, it's likely the other person won't listen to you, just real practically. If you aren't willing to listen to them, don't be surprised when they don't want to hear what you have to say either. If you don't listen, you may end up saying things that don't relate to the person or the issue that they're actually talking about. The Bible says the fool answers a matter before he hears it, and it's folly and shame to him, actually. And we often make ourselves look like fools because we don't thoroughly listen to what someone is saying to us before we know that we know the solution to their problem. And so we start talking and explaining, and they're sitting there thinking, this person really has no clue. If you don't listen, it's going to be hard for you to know how to serve the other person. As Christians, we should be servants, and we're always, hopefully, by God's grace, looking for opportunities to serve people. And if you don't listen to them, it's very difficult to know how to serve them well. If you don't listen, it's going to be hard for you to know what to say that will really, truly help the other person. If you don't listen, you're not treating the other person the way you would want to be treated in their shoes. If you don't listen, you're not acting like Jesus, because Jesus does an awful lot of listening to you. Isn't it amazing that God keeps commanding us to pray? You would think that we would have to say to Jesus and to God, listen to me, but no, it's the opposite way around. Often we don't want to talk to God, and yet God is coming to us and saying, please, please, present your request to me, cast your cares upon me, I want to hear. If you don't listen, you're treating the other person like a problem to be fixed rather than a person to be helped. And honestly, most people don't like to be treated like problems. They like to be recognized as people. Listening is absolutely vital, and it's especially important in our homes. This is one of the places where we often have a hard time listening to people because we feel like we know them so well. Listening is vital, but it's rare, and it's actually also difficult, and maybe that's one reason why it is rare. What does good listening look like? Have you ever asked yourself that? What would it look like for me to be a good listener? Proverbs 18:13. One of the things that's required if you're going to be a good listener is you let the other person speak without constantly interrupting. I don't know if you know those people who constantly sort of break in the middle of almost every sentence. Maybe you are one of those people. If you're one of those people, you're not going to be a good listener. You have to learn to be patient enough to let the person say what they're going to say. If you're going to be a good listener, you need to want to hear what they're going to say and give them your undivided attention. Listening is more than just actually sitting there and pretending like you're listening. It's different than just being quiet for a long time while someone talks and you're actually thinking about everything else in your life. Listening, good listening, means that you're engaged and you're trying to hear what they're saying and you're trying to understand what they're saying. And really, sometimes good listening will involve talking. You'll have to ask questions. I heard you say this. Did you mean that? Let me understand what you're saying. Good listening isn't just trying to figure out what you want the other person to say. Good listening is actually trying to figure out what are they meaning. And if you're going to understand what they're meaning, you have to draw them out of them. Good listening requires that you really understood what they said. So often we get into arguments with people and we're going after them and we're saying, you're doing this and you're saying this and you're meaning this, and actually we don't have any idea what they are meaning and saying. We actually have made up something that they wouldn't even agree with. They're like, I don't even believe that, or I don't even think that. And yet we're spending all this time fighting with them, and we're not even actually addressing the real issue because we haven't understood what they're going to say. You're not always as smart as you think you are. You need to ask questions. You said this. This is how I understood it. What did you mean by that? Don't make them mean by their words what you would mean by those words. Make sure you understood what they meant by those words. What does it take to be a good listener? It takes love. Listening is a way of loving. And if you're going to love that other person, you have to pray, God, help me to see this person as you see them. And good listening requires humility. Proud people who are self-centered people generally aren't good at listening. Let me give you some practical steps you can take to become a better listener. When there are problems, be willing to admit that you're part of the problem. And maybe you not listening has made the problem more difficult than it needed to be. And so as a result, you can come to the person whom you're having a problem with and honestly investigate. Is there something that I've done? So often we come to people and we don't want to know if we've done anything wrong. Actually, what we want to do is prove to them that we didn't do anything wrong, and so we don't listen. But instead, be honest enough to admit that maybe you could be part of the problem and come trying to figure out what really is going on and what do they see you have as having done that could have made the problem more difficult than it needed to be. If you're going to listen well, be willing to change. Be willing to get new information that changes you. You're not a good listener if you're not willing to be different. If you're going to be a good listener and communicate well, avoid the use of emotionally charged words. It makes it very difficult to have a good conversation where you hear what other people are saying. When you're saying things like you never loved me, you are so angry right now. Be careful that you don't use words that makes the situation more hot than it has to be. If you're going to listen, you're going to need to develop some self-control. Be careful that you're not looking non-verbally in ways that make it hard for the other person to speak. or angry looks. I can't believe they said that kind of nonverbal actions. Instead, you want to be kind of engaged and looking like you really want to hear what they have to say, even by the way that your body, by the way that you're handling your facial expressions. If you're going to listen well, make sure that you are asking open-ended questions. Try to find ways in which you can draw out information. Make it clear, even as you ask those questions, that you actually want to hear the answers. If you want to listen well, be encouraging. When someone says something that's hard to you, and it's difficult, but it's honest, and they're really wanting to deal with the problem, thank them for that. Even if it hurts a little, thank you for sharing that about me, and then prove to them that you wanted to hear it by seeking to change. If you want to listen well, pray. Pray that God would make you a good listener, and pray that as you go into a conversation, His priorities for that conversation are your priorities. The goal is not just to prove the other person wrong or get done what you want to get done, but actually the glory of God and the building of a relationship. Obviously, we spend a lot of our life talking, and it has a huge impact in our families, and it makes sense to try to become better at it. And if we're going to become better at it, we can't just become better at talking. We have to become better at listening. And that is going to have such a huge influence in your relationships. If you can learn to be a good listener, it is practically very beneficial. But it's not only beneficial to you practically, it also is about your relationship with God. God has a plan for the way you speak, and He has a plan for the way you listen. So we've spent a lot of time over the past few days talking about talking, and I just want to challenge you to spend some time on your own thinking about the way that you talk. How do you talk? Do you talk in a way that matches up with the gospel? And then how do you listen? Do you listen in a way that honors Jesus and that makes it easier for other people to talk and makes it easier for you to serve them? Or are you the kind of person who just doesn't listen? If you're the kind of person who just doesn't listen, can I ask you something? Please, please repent. You're not honoring Jesus. You're not helping people. You need to change, and God can help you change. It's going to start, though, with humility, and it's going to start with God helping you to grow in your love for people.